This is our domain controller. So we can actually click on it and just say power on. And open the console, and we can open it in the new window. So now we're installing Windows as a virtual machine running on top of our ESXi host, which is also a virtual machine on top of our Mac Pro, which is not a virtual machine. So we're gonna go here, say install Windows. So let's write down a couple more things. Lab VMs. What do we have? We have DCO1, which is our domain controller. 172.17.1.5 we set. We're just going to install the standard desktop experience in this case. It's a lab, I don't need a data center edition of a Windows running here. I'm not using any of those features. New, apply. This is just a standard Windows install. It's really next, 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 and there it goes. Another lab virtual machine we're going to have is vCenter. I'm gonna call it VC, not 01 because we're only gonna ever have one. 172.17.1.10. Later on down the line, we'll have DCO2, 172.17.1.6. I think that's it. So these are our virtual machines. And all of these are on 172.17.1 network, which is our management. Here's another thing, while this is going, in order to reach these networks, as you know, from our Mac Pro, we can actually ping these, right? So our host is 101, we can actually reach it. However, even when we have the DNS, unless we go into the settings of our network interface here and choose our Wi-Fi and actually change the DNS servers, we will not be able to reach something like ESX01.say-sylvanpath.com, which is the domain I would like to use. That doesn't exist. So in order to be able to access this vCenter and a couple of these major management systems from the Mac directly using DNS, we're going to edit the hosts file. So sudo nano etc hosts. Go into this file, type in your password, and then at the very bottom, you want to go and add your hosts. So 172.17.1.5 is DCO1, 172.17.1.10 is going to be VC, 172.17.2.101 is ESX01, 172.17.2.1.2. So these will be in the future. I'm just adding them here now so we can have them. But really, just for the major things so that we can access directly from a Mac, we can log into the vCenter, we can remote desktop into a domain controller and access the ESX hosts. This is kind of really all you would really need to put into your hosts files. So now we can do something like ping esx01.sylvanpath.com and it works. If we ping dco1.sylvanpath.com, it doesn't yet because we didn't set this IP, but you can see that it's trying to ping the correct IP. So we'll get to that shortly as soon as Windows installs. Now we need to set our password on the domain controller. This is going to be administrator password for this system. And you can actually hit here, guest OS, send keys, and send the alt control delete in order to log in. We'll type in that password. So we want to ping dco1.sylvanpath.com. Once we change the IP address, it will actually work. So we have to give it a second here to load up Windows for the first time. You can see no network interfaces or anything yet. There we go, that's much better. So if we open network settings, go to Ethernet, change adapter options. This network is actually going to be our cell phone path MGMT 172.16.1.5. I like to name my network interfaces with IP in it so that whenever I jump on a server, I don't have to go here and click status and try to figure out under details what IP this server actually has on it, like this one. I can just look at the network interface and know if it has or not. And if you have multiple networks and network interfaces, you'll immediately know which one is the one maybe you want to disable or change. However, here we'll go to properties. We'll disable IPv6 because we're not using it. And we're gonna give it a static IP. 172.16.1.5 is our domain controller 01. Now remember, the gateway on VMware Fusion is .2, not .1. If you put .1, it won't work. 208.67.222.222 and 208.67.220 and 220 are open DNS servers that are public that I'm using for everything I always use. And now it's identifying the network. Let's see what's happening. Ping DCO1, 172.17.1.5. Did I do that correctly? Ah, see? Gotta be careful with these private subnets. That should be much better. Ah, another thing. When you deploy Windows, it actually has Firewall on it. So let's disable that. Windows System. Nope. Windows Administrative Tools. Firewall. So we're actually not allowed to ping this system. So we'll go to Firewall. Apply this, and look at that. We can actually reach our domain controller. So let's close the firewall. Network is set correctly. Here I like to, in server management properties, tell it to not pop up every single time I start Windows, because I like to pin it right at the very beginning. And then it's always accessible. And then just a couple of house cleaning, keeping tasks. I don't like all of these things. So we have a Windows machine right now. However, it's just a plain Windows machine. It's not a domain controller, it's not anything. It's simply on the network. We have to do a couple of things to it. So under local server, we want to, number one, change the name. This particular machine is going to be DC01. We'll leave it as a workgroup now because it's not a domain controller yet. We're actually going to turn it into one. And we're not going to restart now because we have more settings to change. Another one is remote desktop. Because we disable the firewall, we do not actually have to open the ports as it's telling us. So that's perfectly fine. Internet security, we want to disable it for administrators so that we can actually browse the internet for the moment. And then the time zone, you should always set to exactly where you're at. We are Eastern Time, US. And that's about it for the basic settings. So we're simply gonna go close all of this and reboot our system. The name change is going to take place, and then when it comes back online, we're actually gonna set it up as a domain controller and install some of the software that you would usually find on a domain controller. Let's see, what would that be? Domain setup tasks. Let's identify them like so. Domain setup tasks. Domain is going to be cellphonepath.com. The first things you have to do is install VMware tools. On any virtual machine that runs on a VMware environment, you should really install VMware tools unless they already come pre-installed or some kind of open source version of them, which usually come pre-installed with a lot of Linux versions out there. For us, it doesn't come with that, so we're gonna click here, guest OS, install VMware tools. This enables better mouse control. It puts the drivers that VMware actually recommends and needs for networking to be nice and fast and all the other things. Always install VMware tools. We should have actually installed it before we rebooted the system, so we would have one less reboot, but that's fine. You live and learn, right? Typical is fine. Don't worry about options in there. By default, it installs everything except some specific things for introspection and whatnot. So everything that is really needed to run this machine well will be installed. Then domain server roles and features. So the next thing we will want is domain server roles and features. And we will want .NET 3.5 framework, which a lot of apps that we may install onto the domain controller will or may require, so it's good to install, useful to have, rather than bothering later. Multipath I/O for playing with iSCSI later on. You don't need that, but it's fine to have. Another thing would be NFS, Telnet, and TFTP clients, Active Directory role, DNS Server role. So those are the things that we want on our domain controller. And we will actually use this domain for Active Directory role. Let's log in one more time. Send all control delete. So that's pinging, we don't need to continue. So here's the domain controller. It has VMware tools. Everything's nice and dandy on it. If we look here, I like to rename my system drive as system. And this is the Windows installer ISO image still mounted on it. So if we go to our server manager, we want to go down the list and actually set up all of this. So we have to wait for this to finish the discovery of the server itself. When it does, we can add roles and features. And as I mentioned, we'll just go down the list. We will want active domain services and all the features that it entails. DNS server. Nothing else here for now. .NET 3.5. Client for NFS. Multipath I/O. You really don't need this, but I know I'm going to be playing with it later, so I'm just doing it right now. And then Telnet and TFTP, just in case I need to access something over those primitive protocols. Next, next, next. Restart if required. There is no one on it. It's a brand new server. There we go. So the Windows will now go through the operation of installing everything we just told it. Alright, so now that Windows is back from the reboot of installing features, let's log in one more time and promote it into an Active Directory controller. It is not an AD until you promote it to an AD. It simply has the feature installed. So we're gonna open the server management or the server manager, and as soon as it rescans itself, we will have a couple of flagged options up here. And here we go. After it rescanned itself, you can see we have Active Domain here, Active Directory Domain Services, and the DNS. However, we have to click here and then promote this server to a domain controller. And this is how that is done. This is a new domain controller. We don't have any domains here. We are adding a new forest, and it's sylvanpath.com. Before, people used to put .local and all of those things. However, nowadays, with all of these systems being cloud connected, if you're deploying brand new systems, it is very useful and it will make your life easier if you actually utilize the domain name that you have that is publicly available. It also simplifies things when it comes to certificates and adding real publicly signed real certificates onto your systems and whatnot. So I would recommend using a .com or whatever it is that you have versus .local nowadays in 2020. This is going to be sylvanpath.com. We're going to leave the forest functionality level to 2016. This really depends as to which other machines or services you're connecting to this domain controller for authentication and other features. However, 2016 is one step behind 2019, and that's as far as I really need to go for compatibility reasons. We will give it a password, which can be used to restore things. As far as this error here, parent zone cannot be found, don't worry about that because we already installed the DNS service features themselves, so it will figure it all out. NetBIOS is usually used by some other computers that are not domain aware and whatnot, so we will simply leave sylvanpath here as the main NetBIOS domain name. Folders are all fine by the default, and we're not going to save the script to install on another domain because we're going to go manually when the time comes. So right here we have a couple of warnings. These are just standard things to warn people about some changes from before. Everything is really fine. As long as you can click the install button, you're good to go. Now this part here actually takes quite a while. So we're simply going to speed it up and come back to it. That took a while. So, main controller is installed. Let's go. Log in. As you can see, there is sylvanpath domain in front of our administrator username right now. Disregard this, no network, no internet access. Domain controllers do that sometimes, it's really weird. We can always double check things by going to the command prompt. We can clearly go to Google, so we're good. Let's check on a couple of things. First thing is DNS. We'll go to the DNS settings. For the ECO1, these are our zones, forward lookup zones, reverse lookup zones, which we will add later. And the ECO1, if we go to properties, we can see it's listening on all IP addresses. Currently it only has one. It's using our OpenDNS forwarders properly because it found them in the settings of the network itself. Advanced settings, it has root hints. Everything else is good. So everything's fine. Our sylvanpath domain is here, DCO1 is here. Now for the reverse lookup zones, VMware really likes when you have your RDNS set properly. So we have to make sure that these exist before we create the A records for our vCenter. So since we're here, we'll create it for all the subnets we have, which are these guys here. So we're going to create it for 172.17.1. We're going to create it for 117.17.2 for our hosts. vMotion, even though it's not needed, I just like to be thorough. 117.17.4. 117.17.255. DMZ. 172.17.101. 172.17.102. That's it. So if we go to sylvanpath here, let's create a couple of DNS records. The first one is ESXi. That's our first ESXi host, 172.17.2.101. And create a pointer record. Since we have reverse DNS, it works. We'll go and create ESX02 just for the future, so we have it already preset, 172.17.2.102. We're going to create a record for vCenter, which is the next thing we're deploying, 172.17.1.10. And I believe that's it for all the VMs. Is everything we have. We're not going to create one for DCO2 because it doesn't yet exist, and because it's going to be a Windows machine which is going to be joined to the domain, that DCO2 record will automatically get created. ESXi1, ESXi2, VC. Everything is perfect. So at this point we can actually go and deploy a vCenter server. Before we go, I'm going to set this to be pinned. And pin another thing that is commonly used on domain controllers. And it's users and computers, or whatever it's called, this guy. So now we can open them up whenever we want to. So this is done. That's our domain controller. What I like to do at this point is actually take a snapshot. DC, all good, all set up, running, take a snap. If we ever need to come back to the domain controller at this particular state in its life, we can just go and revert that snapshot.